idea more than you really are conveying necessarily an image sometimes. Sometimes we're conveying a concept and not just a physical being. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Because we talk about the perception of the Valar, but to be honest, when he uses the word perception, he does so to be vague about how in the world they perceive these things to happen. We want to automatically be like, oh, well, it's my eyes and my ears and my nose, you know, but they had perceptions kind of like beyond human range.
They were gods.
Well, called by men, but they had
powers. The powers of art, I think, is the best phrase there.
Right.
Yep. No. I mean, I think that's a deep well. So we'll leave it there. And then the next point in our notes was that we talked about the latest news on the Amazon Lord of the Rings Prime project. And so one of the few pieces of news in June was that Tom Shippey is no longer a consultant, which is really
too bad. He was a consultant.
He was.
Yeah.
He was. And being that he's a Tolkien scholar,
Yeah, he's like the top.
he's one of the tops.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to bring up his
Did
name
it explain
later.
why?
Nope. At this point, it doesn't.
That's a little worrisome.
It is. I have no idea if it's because of his health, but we all think it might have something to do with issues or just
Creative disagreements.
Exactly.
Yeah. About where they wanted to take it. That's what we're all worried about.
Exactly.
How Peter Jackson-esque do they want to go in one direction or the
Right.
other?
So it's really, or even if they want to go their own way, but
Right.
we just don't know what's going on there. So as far as an update on that particularly, there's nothing much except that some people are speculating that he was fired. I don't know that has a basis to that. So there's not a whole lot. It may be that he had to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's a project like this. Definitely.
Well, yeah, just because otherwise he might tell all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So we haven't gotten any more information on that, but there is something, a little bit of a tidbit on what's been going on with Amazon's project, and I'll just read briefly, not much here, from IndieWire. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
So we'll include the links later.
Read it in your own voice. As far as I know, doesn't trigger anything. It's music and images that I think are the big trigger.
So this is one of the more recent ones I could find. This is from, and it says, while Amazon has become an Emmys juggernaut, no upcoming series proves that more than Amazon's long-awaited multi-season TV adaptation of Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. They've kept news about Lord of the Rings as quiet as it possibly can, but IndieWire has compiled a list of the 9 must-know details about the upcoming series. One key update: on March 17, Amazon Prime Video announced that it was closing production on the series in New Zealand in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which was only 1 month after the series started filming. It was very unfortunate. New Zealand instituted protective immigration measures to protect the country from the coronavirus, which helped, and they actually have been mostly spared from all that. However, a closure of production is not a cancellation of the show. There's still a 2021 air date, and that's in the contract, that they have to
Deliver
start airing something in
whether it's
2021.
junk or not.
I know.
So you would think somebody would take a little bit of kindness on them for doing that.
I thought that they had actually filmed most of season 1 or something. They had already filmed something, but not
I don't know.
not forthcoming with anything. But they were talking about the writers out, and again that it's based on epic source material.
Right.
So they're going to be pulling from the Second Age.
Epic source material.
Yeah,
Is that just a nice way of saying we're... I don't know. Epic sounds like
Well,
really
like the real meaning of epic, in that it's pulling from and they're very kind of guarded on what they can do.
Richard, you lost visual. Refresh your browser if you lost visual, Richard. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. So again, a lot of this is stuff that we know already, so I'm not going to read all that again. But Shippey did tell us earlier, when he was still working for the company, that there will be 20 episodes in the series' first season.
Well, that's better than
And the
these days.
estate of J.R.R. Tolkien has refused to grant Amazon permission to film anything other than the Second Age, as to not alter the history of the more fleshed out Third Age.
Huh.
But you can add new characters and ask a lot of questions.
Huh.
So nothing from the first age.
This is a quote from Shippey.
nothing.
But you can add new characters and ask a lot of questions, like what has Sauron done in the meantime? Where was he after Morgoth was defeated? Theoretically, Amazon can answer these questions by inventing the answer, since Tolkien did not describe it.
Just like we do every Tolkien movie.
Yep. But it must not contradict anything which
Right.
Tolkien did say.
You got to work
I
with
trust
your
you a
canon.
lot more than I trust them, though.
That's what Amazon has,
Maybe someday, who knows?
that's what
We are-
Amazon has to watch out for. It must be canonical. Is it possible to change the boundaries which Tolkien has created? It's necessary to remain Tolkienian. This is why we're a little nervous that Shippey's not working on
Yeah.
this
We,
anymore.
we do have a good relationship with a movie production company called Zombie Orifice Entertainment. And I've been building for the last 3.5 years their streaming media platform, community platform called the Fantasy.network, which Worldcon is running on this end of this month. So we have a relationship that who knows down the road. And they're, because of everything going on, they're switching from live actors to animated voiceovers and stuff, so during the interim. So they're setting up resources, so who knows? I've always wanted to do an animated Silmarillion from the beginning through, and do it in the way that Born of Hope and the others were able to do it as a community license. And apparently Ben, president of Zombie Orifice Entertainment, knows those people and is going to connect me with them. So who knows what the future might hold? Maybe we can bring to life some of the modules, like the Fall of Numenor gaps that I wrote.
Yes.
As this year's
which
theme.
which is. Let's go ahead and segue into that. So, can you give us an update, because we
need to reschedule.
we do.
We were going to do it the third week
August.
of August. So the way it is right now with Worldcon and Worldcon is just kicking my butt. We're getting there, but it's kicking my rear. I'm doing 20 to 22 hour days, 7 days a week. I am exhausted. When August 2nd is over, all of RPG research is going to take 7 days off. We're going to sleep for 7 days. We are exhausted. Between Gen Con and Worldcon simultaneously, that means only a week of prep time for Tolkien Moon, which means it won't be decent. Well, it'll be a disaster. Or there'll be nobody there. So Katie strongly suggested, I proposed to you, the board, Richard, part of that because he's been around all the time, postponing it until September so that we have time to focus on Tolkien Moon. That'll give us a little over a month to prepare, which we do okay with that. And generally the past we've only done with 2 or 3 weeks, really. We give ourselves a month, and it's redoing what we already have for the adventure. But that's a proposal on the floor, up for discussion, debate, and a vote.
How's it going with so that it's still going to be well, this goes
Be
back
the
to your
3rd
comment. So
September.
it'll be on Numenor and a return to Numenor.
Yeah, it would still be the same. Everybody already voted on all
Arc.
that. Everything would be the same. We're just talking about changing it by 1 month more.
Right.
So originally it would have been July, but because everything we moved it to August.
Right.
We were sketchy about that being too tight.
Do you have any other people running tables besides me?
Yes, we do. We have between AIM
John.
and everything, and David and Dan
Okay.
and Danielle.
Is Danielle
They're
still gonna
all
be
able
here?
to run AIM.
Okay.
Still be here?
Okay. I thought that she was not going to be able to stay that long. That's what I overheard from you or John, I thought.
Well, Richard's just going to get married, and I'll move to.
Okay, okay.
But
So
that's on hold.
we have people.
We have lots of people now. We've been
Okay.
training people for Gen Con. We're going to
Right.
have more people than we ever had if we
Right.
want.
Well,
Maybe.
that's the thing, is that you have so much energy that has to be sucked up into
Yeah. So that would become September the 19th, which is a week after Katie and I have our birthdays.
And is actually right before Frodo and Bilbo's birthday on the
Right.
22nd.
In September, a lot of Tolkien events. So, how do you guys feel about September the 19th instead of August?
That sounds reasonable.
The reason why we didn't want to push into September originally, this is before everything was happening, is most people are back in school, and so that lowers attendance. Because of certain circumstances, that's less of an issue now, since most of our attendees will be virtual. We will have our GMs here in each room, right? You'll have a room. So right now, Dan, is running a game for Spark Central out of the Blue Room. And David, Danielle, and John are in the main studio. We have my office as another studio. We have the Red Room as another studio. We have this trailer as a studio, that trailer as a studio, the bus as a studio. We can run up to 8 rooms simultaneously at my house here without taking over the upstairs, without taking over the dining room or into the office or any of that stuff. Just downstairs.
Okay,
And
but how
these.
does that work with the way that?
So we have one GM per room, with set up with a camera, actually 2 cameras generally, and they GM and everybody else is virtual. They remote in.
Also, everybody's virtual.
Anybody who wants to be here physically is welcome to be here. There
It
will
just
be
won't
people
look the
being
same as last year.
It's just more people are going to be remote than in person because of the current thing. People are not going to show up physically. Like
We might
before.
get more people that way.
We may get a lot more actual participation.
For Tolkien especially.
Except for one thing. We are seeing with our community programs, so first there's a big increase. Now we're losing a lot of people because everybody's seeing Zoom burnout is what I'm calling it.
Yeah.
They're getting a little burned out on the virtual thing. But for Tolkien Moot, we've always done it virtual since 2005 I didn't have the bandwidth, 2006 I didn't. I think since 2007 or 8 we broadcast and had people virtually engaged. So
I'm
it
fine
isn't a
moving
big
it.
change.
I'm fine moving it to September 19.
Okay.
School starts
right.
for me. So
that was part of the concern. That's why we
I
didn't
think
want to
it's-
do that.
I think it's probably okay though.
Okay, since it's only one day.
So the game master
Instead of
moves
3
all the
days.
pieces.
Yeah, I think Saturday. I'll put it
it's all
down.
day Saturday, and it's not like the normal 3 day. We used to do 3 day Tolkien Moot, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
Actually, one year we did a hardcore. The people who went Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday,
Jeez.
because they could not get enough Tolkien gaming. That was Chris Wade and a few others.
Well, that was during the drought too. I mean, you think about the
Yeah,
early-
when there was no game
There
system.
was no game
I
system.
created my own, and
IC
yeah.
Crown Enterprises was
was
had
gone.
been- they were
and
gone.
Decipher was gone.
And this is
before
pre-Tor and
Yep.
AIM.
Yep. So, all right. Well, is everybody okay with that? We do September 19th instead
Yeah,
for
what
Tolkien
are
Moot?
the times?
Saturday, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. give or take.
Yeah.
Usually, we want people to show up at 7:30 a.m. for registration and see assignments, character sheets, all that. We do opening ceremonies 8 a.m. We're usually gaming by 8:30,
Nine.
or at least everybody's seated by 8:30 and doing their intros.
Yep.
And by 9 a.m. we're actually
So
gaming.
that was session from 9 till
Yeah.
lunch.
So we try to fit in 4 sessions
Yep.
of gaming.
Morning, early
And-
afternoon.
Or
is
3.
usually.
We fit in 3 gaming sessions and 1 Tolkien Society session.
Yes, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That has a direct full circle now.
Yep.
Back to Tolkien Society. So that explains what we're doing next month. So we'll still have our Tolkien Society meeting
Yeah,
on
normal Saturday.
normal
the-
third Saturday, which
Yeah.
should be the 15th or the
I think
it's
you're
the
right.
15th
We'll pull it up. This computer's slow.
August. So next meeting.
We have an anthem that goes with our opening ceremony.
We have no anthems. We just have opening ceremonies. Anybody wants to compose one? I mean, maybe I should do that. I composed my wedding procession
I'm sorry,
last
I'm
year.
thinking like
yeah,
you
15th.
shouldn't ask
We-
questions
we need
unless
an-
you expect an answer.
we need an anthem and we need some fireworks. I think those two.
Fireworks
things-
can't do that. I can do digital fireworks on the big screen, or I can do a projector on the whole wall of fireworks. We can't do real ones.
So we can't go outside and record it.
It would be great to have a Tolkien Moot anthem. I could compose one. I composed it for our shows. What? A musician, and yeah, I guess I don't usually say composer, but I guess I am technically.
You are.
I've just never been paid for my compositions. I've been paid for performing. I've never been paid for composing.
But you know what they call Bach and Beethoven? Decomposers.
Oh, yeah, I play over 20 instruments, and I can do electronic compositions now too. So, Yeah.
20 instruments, but you
More.
do realize the triangle isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, I don't count that. Percussions is like a whole bunch of others. I don't count.
Music is
All right.
one of his wheelhouses. So
Yeah.
So, all right. So is it okay then? So we will. So we'll have Tolkien Society next month on August 15th, normal time, 1 to 3 p.m. And this keeps us on our schedule.
we're getting back.
Wait,
Yeah.
wait, you said when?
August 15th, Saturday, August 15th. That's when it would have been Tolkien Society
Yeah.
otherwise. I mean, it would have been Tolkien Mood
Well,
otherwise.
I'm not. Don't change it for me, but I think my family's going camping that
yeah,
way.
a lot of people. It'll
Sure.
be August is just that
I'm
way.
not sure. I can't remember.
We're letting you know what the schedule is.
Yeah, because I think
Take it or leave it.
we've had a kind of a hiatus and a bit of a struggle, and now
Gotta
we're
get
really
back to
trying to get
routine.
back into that third
Yeah.
Saturday and just keep it that way.
Yep.
So
So
and
the-
if people can make it good, if
Yeah.
not, that's fine.
Yeah, and remember, you can always be virtual. And then Richard hasn't come back. Richard! Come back to us.
Richard.
Come back to Mordor.
I-
We'll take you.
No, I thought of the Ents, the song of the Entwives, right? Come back to me.
Oh, I was thinking of the Ralph Bakshi. Come back. Come the ring. Come back to Mordor.
I just want to
We'll
rotoscope you
take
right now.
Rotoscope.
It's
That's how they did
know
that
what
style.
it is.
What's the deal with Richard?
I don't know. Can you
Maybe
text
he got
him?
frustrated. I
You
don't
just
know.
text him and say we don't know where you are. Okay, last part of the notes. Letters to Tolkien. We read letters 172, 3, and 4. Focus on topics such as Celticness. He was doing some lectures, and actually the publication of the Return of the King in October 1955, and how he was worried because the day after it was published, he had a lecture, and he said all these college students are going to be staying up all night reading the book, and they're going to come in and they're going to be so tired. Yeah, he's like, but what about my Irish, whatever? And it was really hilarious because we were talking about the fact that the Two Towers ends with Frodo was alive, but taken by the enemy.
Yeah.
Can you imagine waiting a year? Like, what happens next? There is no, I'll just look it up on here, You are stuck,
Well,
man.
remember Empire Strikes Back? Cliffhangers with that. Yeah.
Well, but
yeah.
remember, we used to watch
That's how it used to
TV.
be.
We TV.
had
We'd
to wait.
watch something on Friday,
Yeah.
and we'd have
Had
to
to
wait
wait a
for
week.
Monday.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dad, get
Yeah.
out of here, man.
Yeah.
There was no streaming? How did you live?
Yeah.
You had to
No
wait
binge
till-
You
watching.
can't binge
Yeah.
a whole 8 seasons.
It really, and you know what? That has a psychological impact
It
on
does.
people's impulse control and stimulus levels and
Binge watching?
the reinforcing behavior of binge watching,
Like
and
being able to just
instant gratification
Well,
rather than delayed gratification.
especially if it's
things
set
like
up. I mean,
that.
all of these streaming services typically, well, not all of them, but like I know Netflix does this, and I think Amazon Prime as well. But when you're watching a series, it just starts automatically preloading, and the next episode starts in 20 seconds.
Yep.
So you have to consciously say, "I am not going to watch the next
Yeah.
one." So,
So
it is hard,
it has long-term psychological impact that we're seeing now societally.
especially if
and
you're
a consequence.
younger than
The entire
25.
So
generation.
Netflix is saying, "Hey, you gamers, see, I knew I could beat you out."
So anyway, so we done with
And last but not least, latest issues of Amon Han and Malorn. I shared those. Sorry I didn't bring
Okay.
them this
No,
time.
that's all right.
You know, I did mention those.
Mhm.
And yep. And then also, what parts of the Lord of the Rings were filmed in the spring and summer of 2020, long years ago, pre 9/11. So it was really interesting to say, what were they about? What were they doing? What were they filming in July of 2020?
and Worldcon, so speaking, because they were filming that in New Zealand. So
Oh,
Worldcon was supposed to be in New Zealand this year. The 78th annual Worldcon, which is where they give out the Hugo Awards.
Yes.
So books and sci-fi and fantasy, this is intertwined, we're interconnected. So again, we're writing the software and the platform to help run Worldcon online so that there is a Worldcon. Worldcon has run for 7-8 years. There was a little bit of a gap during World War II and stuff. Other than that, they've run pretty much consistently. They never did anything online. Now going to a completely virtual Worldcon. It's called Con Zealand. And the Fantasy Network and us are part of making that actually happen. But it was going to be in New Zealand, of all places. And now it's going to be virtual. So, and they're still hosting it, right? Because every year they're like the Olympics. Different countries bid for where it will be next. It was here in Spokane in 2015. and I was paid to be a speaker at
For
that.
me, not getting to see New Zealand, like getting to go
Yeah.
to take a trip and see
Yeah.
the green. I'm
Oh,
sorry,
yeah.
but it's not. I love virtual and I love how effective it is. But there's,
No, the real thing. You
but
bet.
getting out there
You
and
bet.
actually seeing the
Yep.
Visiting
grass.
politics.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah,
moving
so
on.
very cool.
So yeah, sorry that was a long time, but we had a good
Yeah, we all
discussion
covered-
about. Yep. So yeah, so now we
session
have,
after so long.
we have the next hour or 45 minutes here.
Yes.
What do we want to cover today?
So what do we have for letters? Because if you
Well,
have a topic covered, great.
175. We don't
Okay.
have any particular topic.
All
I
right.
tried to be
Do
really
we
organized
want to talk
last
about
month.
Numenor because that's coming up in 2
Yeah, let's
months?
do that.
So how much do you guys know about the rise and fall of the Dunedain, the Numenorians, except what would become the Dunedain, but they were the Edain, and then 3 tribes became Numenorians, and then the Numenorians broke into the King's Men, which would later be called the Black Numenorians, and the Dunedain, the Faithful, the Elendili. So how much do you guys know about the whole Dunedain,
It's been a while
Numenorian?
since I read it.
Right.
I
So
have
what
to
do
be
you
honest.
remember?
I have to be honest, the Dunedain and the Numenor age is, for some reason, I'll read the Silmarillion up to that point, and I know a lot about the Third Age, but I don't know why, but that little segment in
It's
between
really
is,
complicated politically.
well, it's not even that, it feels a little bit compressed compared to some of the other ages in some ways, in my...
Well, okay, yeah. If you just read like the fall of the Calabeth, Calabeth, the fall of
right.
Numenor, that's only 10 pages. So it is compressed, and that's your main. Up until the other books came out, that was it.
It's a zip file.
Yeah,
It's very compressed.
there wasn't much there. It was a short story.
Right.
But if you read the unfinished tales and all the other sources that come out, now you've got a long arc. In the Silmarillion is the setup that leads to the Numenorians, the battles that happen there and such. Because they defeat Morgoth, the Valar thank these 3 loyal tribes of men, because all the others betrayed, by giving them an entire island continent.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's Tolkien's Atlantis mythos, right?
It is, in fact.
Atlantale, yeah.
It is,
Atalante.
if I may.
Please.
So I brought along my beat-up copy of Tolkien and the Silmarillion by Clyde S. Kilby, who was a professor at Wheaton College in Illinois, but also spent a summer with Tolkien, basically assisting him.
Nice.
And yeah, right. He assisted him in He was involved in MythCon, and I mean, this guy was very influential. But he was there in the late 60s. Yes. Here we go.
What are we reading?
So
Sorry.
I'm just going to read brief excerpts from this. But yes, I believe it was 1964 was the year that he stayed. Or I don't know if he stayed there, but he stayed nearby, and he came and worked with.
Kind of like Neil deGrasse Tyson about Carl Sagan taking him under his wing or
Yeah.
sitting at a bus stop or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, can you imagine?
I know. So I actually knew somebody who knew Clyde S. Kilby and had him as her professor.
Oh, wow.
So I became friends. We're lost touch now, but Lucy Shaw is a poet and a writer from the Pacific Northwest. Her husband, Harold Shaw, they had a publishing company, and she attended Wheaton College back in the 50s or 60s. Anyway, and Clyde S. Kilby, her professor, around that time, then spent a summer with Tolkien. So it's kind of a neat connection. He says this. He says a couple of comments. Again, he spent the summer with Tolkien, helping him, getting an idea of things, assisting him with some manuscripts. But he says this about Numenor. First of all, page 24, he has the intention of completing a full account of the Second Age of Middle-earth under the title, the Calabeth, a word made up of Calab, meaning fall down, with the doubled L giving it intensity, i.e. the Great Fall. Mm-hmm. The Numenorian language, he informed me, is based on Hebrew.
Yeah.
And then,
Oh, I thought the Dwarvish was.
it's possible. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that several things that Tolkien would
Yeah,
say.
that's true. He would. I mean, he had multiple influences. So.
It is.
And sometimes he was trying to simplify stuff for other people.
Or throw red herrings out there too,
Oh, okay.
depending. But
What,
yes,
to throw
Just
it
a
in?
toy with your mind.
Throw the fish away. It comes back to me.
Boomerang.
so he says, but if England is indeed Shire country, then what of the rest of Middle Earth? In a telephone conversation with Tolkien, Mr. Henry Resnick asked what was east of Rhûn and south of Harad, to which Tolkien replied, Rhûn is the Elvish word for east, Asia, China, Japan, and all the things which people in the West regard as far away, and south of Harad is Africa, the hot countries. Then Mr. Resnick asked, that makes Middle Earth Europe, doesn't it? He discusses the whole thing in here about how it's not, but it is. And Tolkien said both. Then
Schrodinger's cat.
Right? If the
Maybe
it's
my
not that.
cat be dead.
Mr. Resnick asked, that makes Middle Earth Europe, doesn't it? To which Tolkien replied, yes, of course, Northwestern Europe, where my imagination comes from. Not long afterwards, when I mentioned this interview to Tolkien, he denied having ever said these things. Yet later, when in my own efforts to get the geography of the Silmarillion straight, I asked Tolkien where Numenor was, he promptly responded, in the middle of the Atlantic. Is this another instance of the professor's consistency? Or is there a logical explanation? He is reported to have said specifically that Mordor would be roughly in the Balkans. Yeah. All this thrusts upon us not simply geography, but European history and the allegorical framework that which Tolkien so vociferously denied. Look. For instance, shall we not under these circumstances take a new look at the degradation of the Shire during the absence of the four hobbits, and the cleansing and rehabilitation that became necessary? To localize a story geographically or temporally is always at least a threat, which undercuts any larger meaning, certainly a mythic one. And last, he says about his summer and what Tolkien said. Oh yes. I think this is where he's talking about Lewis. He says, let's see here now. Oh yeah. Although Tolkien spoke to me warmly of his long and happy association with Lewis, he also sometimes found fault with him. He mentioned that Lewis borrowed from him. I pointed out that Lewis had acknowledged the borrowing of the word Numenor, but Tolkien insisted there were unacknowledged echoes in Lewis. In the letter to Jared C. Lobdell, Tolkien had mentioned Eldil as one example, also Tinidril as a composite of his Idril and Tinuviel. A copy of Perelandra given by Tolkien to friends contains one of those equivocal notes characteristic of him. On the jacket, he has written, a bottle of sound vintage, I hope. Tolkien wrote me that he found Lewis's letters to an American lady deeply interesting and very moving. I have cited earlier in this volume Tolkien's remark that except for Lewis's encouragement, The Lord of the Rings might never have been published, warned, praised, and deep. Anyway, so those are the comments I wanted to bring. Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
I wanted to interject something else. So we did a road trip recently to go see my newborn granddaughter.
Yes,
in New
congratulations.
Hampshire. Thank you. And the other part of the trip was down in Texas to pick up the beginnings of our museum for the RPG Historical Museum. So just a little bit of a nice thing about that. So we have 25 boxes of the history of gaming and media's treatment of gaming and the gamers, going back to 1971 up until Paul Caldwell's death in this April. So he was having us come down and scan it, or pick it up, scan it all, and give it back to him. Then he passed away, so his wife is bequeathing it, and we're creating the role-playing game Historical Museum. Starting with this, there'll be a Paul Caldwell wing, in memoriam and all that. It is going to take us months, if not years. He has boxes of correspondence, handwritten letters, audio cassettes of talking to all kinds of people. It may include authors. I don't know yet. We haven't even itemized it yet.
You know I have experience with archives, right?
Do you?
Yeah.
We need your help then.
Yeah.
I've got some archivists now who are remote.
Good.
But I could sure use one locally. So if you want to have yet another little project.
Did he seem to keep it somewhat organized? Did he have a system of his own?
Yes and no.
That's what he calls little?
There's 25 boxes.
25 is nothing compared
I
to
can
Tolkien.
show you. His wife, she tried. It was all on shelves. Yes, there was a quasi. There was
How much of that was his own?
It was all in file cabinets
Yeah.
by alphabetical, and it'll have to be figured out. So would love to have you as part of that if you'd be interested. He has 2 unpublished books in there,
Really?
manuscripts that are written on recycled paper from the church flyers,
Wow.
the blank side of the flyers he used for his manuscripts. So one is a book on all games at the time, like board games and everything in 1971, a snapshot in history that didn't get published. And then the other one is about the media treatment of games and gamers that didn't get published. It was going through editing and stuff, and then he has had other books published, so and some game systems and all of that,
What's
of
this
which we
guy's
have
name?
copies. Paul Cardwell, Cardwell. So he created the Committee for the Advancement of Role-Playing Game Advocacy, which I'm a member, and so anyway, we have the beginning of a museum. We really need donations to have a physical museum. We will start with a virtual museum, but my house is overflowing with books. At some point, I've got to get enough money in donations or something to have a warehouse that we can move operations to and all this stuff. Because there's not, literally, it's like going to the ceiling in some rooms now.
You need to win the lottery, huh?
I don't believe in that. That's not empowering.
I'm just
Yeah,
joking.
I know. No, I know.
I'm
but I have
saying
another-
like build a bigger house with the money you have, right?
Yeah, no, I don't want to keep it here. We want to move it.
No, we're going to a
warehouse.
bunker.
We want to create a walk. We want to create a walk-through historical museum that's you can experience it. We will start online with just the historical timeline, all the way back to 3,000 or 6,000 BC.
That's where to
the
begin.
history of games, and move forward from there. And anyway, and that Tolkien is a key part of this. Tolkien is part of that history, so there will be a portion of it dedicated to Tolkien. First, it'll be on, so it's rpgmuseum.org. It's part of the nonprofit 501c3. To donate, it's gofundme.com/rpgmuseum. And if we get enough in donations, then eventually we'll be able to open up a physical museum in addition to the website. So, yeah, so that'll be growing over the coming years. That was really, I'm very stoked. Once August 2nd is over, I got to rest, but get going on that. Very excited to get going on that.
Okay, Christopher Tolkien,
Yes.
keeper of his father's legacy, right?
How
Passed
many
away in
boxes?
January. 70
70 boxes.
of unpublished material.
Oh,
That's what he then
Oh.
created the history
Yeah,
of Middle Earth.
yeah.
70.
yeah. So it weighed over 1,000 pounds to transport this, that we have to wade through and categorize, itemize, and OCR, scan and OCR.
We need to get those off the carpet, just in case you have a leak in the basement.
The flood, yeah, that would be good. Yeah, that's a
you
good
really
point.
need to have something underneath
Yeah.
there. Maybe just some
If
boards.
you want after the meeting, I can show you.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk.
There isn't much space left in my house.
No, not really.
Downstairs. It's
Okay,
need a
so
warehouse.
let's see.
okay.
Was that?
Numenor. Anyway, we can throw it back to Numenor, but I
Right.
wanted to interject that.
Yeah, please do.
All right. So, and please, you're probably a little bit better with the numbers and names than I am. I'm really good with narrative. Like I can recite movies and books and stuff quite well as far as all the events of the narrative and everything. I'm terrible with names and dates. I'm kind of like timey-wimey, loosey-goosey, you know. So,
Well, as long
way
as you
back
get them
when,
in order.
well, yeah,
As long
generally,
as you get them in order.
yeah, generally. So way back when there were the multiple battles against Morgoth on Middle Earth, up in Angband and all of that up north. This is back in the early 80s.
That was a real metal band.
And he had converted most of the races, especially the race of the men, to his side, except for 4 tribes. So he said the 3 tribes, Beor, Hjor, but then there's
It depends on
but
whether
then
you-
there's the Wozes,
There are the
the
Wozes.
Druidine. So
Yes.
it's really 4.
Really, yes.
So, but they're the
Although they
3
had a symbiotic relationship with the Haladim,
yeah,
and so that's, I think, in
A
a way
little.
they were kind of considered.
yeah.
Well, weren't
It's a little
they,
fuzzy on that.
Weren't
but-
they not the Wozes though? Were they? They were kind of like the, there was this set of elves. There's three different elves,
Right.
that ended up going over to Amon. That was led by
different leaders? Yeah,
no. One of the Valar.
Let's get to the.
Oh,
I'm getting to the point.
Orome?
I'm getting to the point. What
Is
I'm
there parallel
saying
here?
What I'm saying is that it was dependent upon their their loyalty to the Valar and to the elves and how they interacted, and that the Woses were like the farthest distant when it came to knowing the Valar, because they had no witness as the other men did through the elves who described to those men.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Like,
So
they were
right.
there was a difference because the men were loyal to these men were loyal to the elves in a way, because they never met the Valar directly, and so they were told stories by the elves to the men, and that's the difference between the tribes, because the Woses were not given that information because they weren't connected.
So would you
to
say
the
that there's a
elves that
parallel
way.
between kind of like the dynamic with the elves and the lights of the two trees, and over here we have the houses of men, and which ones were taught by the elves and which ones were kind of left on their own?
Well, right, because there was the three families of elves. There was the
Right.
ones that went. There was the ones
the
that
Vanyar, the
went and
Noldor.
came back, and then there were the ones that stayed, and they
Right.
were called dark elves.
Because they hadn't seen the light of the trees.
Right, they hadn't seen the light of the trees, but the men were born after the light of the trees, and they came in, but
Right.
they met the elves,
Right.
and it was a different thing, because I think if the Woses had seen the elves, they might worship the elves. You see what I'm saying? Like,
So there is only one free peoples, one group ever in the history of Middle Earth that was never corrupted by Morgoth or Sauron. Only one. You know which one that is?
I know you've told us a couple of times,
I don't remember.
The Woses.
The Druidine.
but
They're
they,
the only ones who never, not one of them ever fought on the dark side.
but it
They
was
never got
Whereas
It
corrupted.
with
was
all the
the
other-
primitive, the good primitive, as
Well, it
somebody
was the noble savage is,
Yeah.
is how that people like to lump that together. But that has a lot of baggage, especially these days.
What I think is fascinating is that he
and I
chose
think that discredits. I think, and I don't
Right.
think Tolkien discredited him that way. I think others
Well, but
are
Tolkien,
projecting and discrediting.
Tolkien saw that, and I'm going to get a little bit religious, but Tolkien saw that he believed that the mythic stories that were spoken of in the past did have a light to them that should bring them to the one and true God. And so there was some part of him that would say that these myths that were perpetrated amongst all these peoples had a seed of truth that would lead them back to the one and only God. And that is the reason why the Woses were probably allowed as at the way that Tolkien allowed them. But they had a warped
I don't know
vision.
what you
They had a
mean.
warped vision, but they were allowed because
Can I-
even C.S. Lewis
Can I,
had,
can I replace warped with incomplete?
okay, maybe
I think
incomplete.
that's a different.
And I have no idea what you're talking about regarding the Druidine.
It's good. Finish your
go ahead and
sentence.
say
so
what
The
you're
rest
saying,
of us can.
I'm
can
lost.
respond
C.S. Lewis had a similar Tash. Was it Tash? Tosh? Where this
You're talking
guy,
about the Chronicles of Narnia.
yeah, where this guy worshipped Tash, and then later he found out he was worshiping.
Yeah. So Lewis, if I may,
Go ahead.
he kind of experiments also with the idea of here's an innocent guy who's got some kind of, in this case, the Calamines are definitely worshiping a quasi-demonic entity or deity, and so he kind of looks at how that goes, and then this guy ends up saying, I didn't really understand what I was following. Now I understand, and he follows Aslan. I think the difference would be, although I can see where you're trying to go there, Corey, but I would say that Tolkien's doing something different and unique, and I think it goes back to the fact that when he plays with cultures, or when he doesn't even play, when he invests cultures with meaning, these invented cultures, he's really trying to get at something different and new that might not have a complete parallel in this world. So there's elements of our own, say, pagan, pre-Christian civilizations in Europe, and that definitely was something that Tolkien was in his mental furniture. But I think, seeing as how with his faith definitely influenced his works, but he deliberately was also trying to get at kind of a proto human experience that was not because a lot of days nowadays, some people, like for example, if you look at the interviews on the extended edition of the Lord of the Rings, DVDs or whatever, they'll have some people out there will be like, oh yes, Tolkien is just pulling from all these pagan European traditions.
Yeah,
and I think that there's a little bit of an axe to grind there. Just
Yeah.
like some people, I think, would try to push too much meaning into. This is exactly how his Christianity influenced his thing.
Yeah.
I think the mythical beauty of the Druidine Moses is that he is, in some ways, showing here's a group of people who's not. They're not necessarily on the elf side,
Because no one's altogether on their side.
But at the same time, it's more like the Ents than the dwarves in the last battle,
Yes.
who are all like, well, we're against everybody.
Right.
And they're not like
Yeah,
that.
it's much more-
There's
Well,
something that
the
is...
ants are very focused on their area, their trees, the love of the trees. That is their domain, the forest. But the Duodine or the Wozes, whatever, are they talk about, well, we can sense the sun above the clouds, okay, and that is,
And the earth unstable beneath their feet.
right. And what I believe, and you and me have had this conversation, is I believe Chesterton has made a good case for the fact that mythology created by man, even though it's incomplete and imperfect, has a light to it, the gods, as he calls them, and that is the positive part of paganism, that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis both said, okay, these parts
Right.
of art that is created by man is by imagination grasping at something that they don't quite understand. And I believe that is the thing is that the Wozes, or whatever you want to say, are kind of that pagan people that are still good, so to say,
Yeah.
that are out there. They're not trying to serve evil.
They're not corrupt.
They're not malicious. They're not spending their life, gluttonous or whatever. They're following their conscience as far as they can
And they're
go.
in tune with nature perfectly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting because a lot of Indians in the United States were a lot like that before white man came. Was they believed in the Great Spirit,
Yeah.
and they lived off the land in a way that was very different than the way we do. We take.
So, Corey,
So-
I respect you, but I think that we need to let someone else share
Okay, I'm
their
sorry.
opinion. No, because
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
No, I get too
You
excited.
have, and I appreciate that because you have good ideas, but I think good ideas are best used in a conversation. We haven't heard a whole lot from you, Anthony. What do you think about all this?
Well, I think it could be said that Druidine represent kind of what his thought, Tolkien's thoughts on civilization, because I think Tolkien remarked that he didn't really have much of a respect for modern civilization, especially because of the second two World Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah, the infernal combustion engine.
Yeah, and he had a lot of fond memories of childhood, being like a
Yeah,
circle of bells,
Birmingham and all that.
Yeah.
And so I think his representation of the Druidine could be representative of his views on modern civilization.
Right.
So, and how like the peoples of Gondor, a lot of the Gondorian kings were corrupted by greed and
Right.
especially Denethor, because he wanted the throne of Gondor, right?
Whereas the Wozes don't create power over anything.
Yeah, they didn't have much of a hierarchy.
Do they?
They were very tribal. They had the living Pukel men and such, the stone living guardian statues. They had chieftains.
Well, right. I didn't say that they didn't ever want to have any positions of authority, but I mean, was there a lust for power there compared to Because you basically
No,
said
I mean
you're-
it was a big part about living with the land rather than against it
Right.
and such. So it was kind of like how the elves shaped, even more so. They did a arguably more magical shaping of the land, literally because of the Pukul men and such that supposedly could come to life as guardians, etc. I mean, they never warred amongst themselves, but they were hunted. You know, they were treated as orcs by most of the Mannish races, and part of that may have been because of Melkor. You know, because they were a threat, because they never succumbed to his minions. His minions tried over and over and over, and they could always sense, and they often could avoid.
even the
they could
Numenorians
sense-
hunted them at first.
Yes, when they went with the Numenorians.
Well, I was referring to
Pre-Numenorian, they hunted them at first, and then they fought in the battle.
when they were sailing along and exploring and starting to conquer parts of Middle Earth during.
Well, later, that's way, because there were Druidine on
okay.
Numenor.
Okay, so go back.
And they left shortly before the fall,
So-
because
so-
the earth was unsteady beneath their feet.
So, I'm sorry. Did you get a chance to finish
I
your
finished.
thought?
Yeah.
So my question then would be, why did some Druidine go to Numenor and not all? What was that about? Was that because of that alliance with the House of Haleth? And
Yeah, it was because of the battle. They, as far as my take on it, comrades in arms, they just survived a horrible war,
it was an honor.
and those who went through that were offered this gift. Most did not go, many did, in all the tribes. There were many who stayed behind, but many who went. The land was war-torn. It was the last time, right, until the fall of Numenor, that the world got reshaped again because of the battle. It was the last time the Valar fought on the planet, because it was destroying it. So the world was in upheaval and torn up and shredded, literally shredded. And here's this beautiful new pristine land, you know, one step away from paradise being offered, or stay here in you know, Hades on Earth, basically. So some took that and some decided to stay behind. And what happened during the intervening centuries is Middle Earth fell back into darkness. And the Mannish races succumbed once again to Morgoth nature and such, and fell back to becoming very primitive. And that's where they started hunting the Druidine and such, which is argued minions of Morgoth were seeking revenge in their part against Morgoth, and for never succumbing. They were never able to make them part of their force, and not one Druidine is ever cited in the slightest bit. They could sense evil coming and would disappear. Right? They just were really good at that. And then they were on Numenor. They could sense that Numenor was going to collapse. As the King's men started to go dark side, more and more Druidine started to leave Numenor as a trickle. But there were Druidine up until almost the final day.
This is a nice little summary I found. Apparently, I don't know if you found anything else, but it says here, this is on Sci-Fi Stack Exchange, but it says the only information about Druidine in Numenor in all of Tolkien's writings is to be found in a footnote to the Druidine essay in Unfinished Tales, itself extracted from the longer work of Dwarves and Men, published in History of Middle-earth 12. In the Annals of Numenor, it is said that this remnant was permitted to sail over sea with the Atani, and in the peace of the new land throve and increased again, but took no more part in war, for they dreaded the sea. What happened to them later is only recorded in one of the few legends that survived the downfall, the story of the first sailings of the Numenorians back to Middle-earth, known as the Mariner's Wife. In a copy of this written and preserved in Gondor, there is a note by the scribe on a passage in which the Druidine in the household of King Aldarion, the mariner, are mentioned. It relates that the Druidine, who were ever noted for their strange foresight, were disturbed to hear of his voyages, foreboding that evil would come of them, and begged him to go no more. But they did not succeed, since neither his father nor his wife could prevail on him to change his courses, and the Druidine departed in distress. From that time onward, the Druidine of Numenor became restless, and despite their fear of the sea, one by one, or 2 by 3s, they would beg for passages in the great ships that sailed to the northwestern shores of Middle-earth. If any asked, "Why would you go, and whither?" they answered, "The great isle no longer feels sure under our feet, and we wish to return to the lands whence we came."
Yep. And they were having visions of what was coming.
So none of them were there. It says here
Towards the end. And
at the end.
that is where I took artistic license to have one left.
Right, which
in
would
the
make sense.
adventure.
Yes.
So, to
Well
guide
done.
them
Well
out
done.
there.
Stephen Law had wrote a whole series about King Arthur and Taliesin and so on and so forth. And he essentially assumed that Atlantis had a prophet that was going around and telling everybody to get off the land before essentially it sunk.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody thought this prophet was loonier than because he would fall down and foam at the mouth
Right.
and whatnot. But the point is that it ended up being that the people of Atlantis had landed somewhere in Britain and had taken up, and so.
So, did we decide we're going to do this time in order, right? We're going to start with
3.
We're going to start
Rise,
with
the Golden Age, and Fall.
we're going to start with the first contact, the gift bringers.
Yep.
Then the rise of Numenor, and then the fall of the Numenor.
Yeah.
Okay. So the various tribes of the Edain, including the Druidine, went on ships to Numenor, and then the elves just took them on ships. They didn't have the knowledge. They didn't construct. The elves dropped them off, and they were completely isolated, cut off from Middle Earth for centuries. While Middle Earth fell back into darkness, and all the banished tribes fell under the sway in terror. And there's lots of stories about the horror, the shadows, and the creatures coming back that probably had escaped the pits of Angband and spread far and wide. And meanwhile, they throve in Westernesse. And slowly they built up their power, and they were very long-lived, especially what would become, the branch of Elendil and all that.
Yep.
Some living 400 or 500 years, others 200 or 300 years.
Which is where Aragorn gets that.
Yes, and over time, their lifespan became a little. Their lifestyle became glorious. Their lifespan became shorter and shorter. And at first, they were very much about worshiping the Valar and all of that. But slowly, as their mortality became more and more in their face, they started to increasingly focus on the fear of death. Started creating, great burials and all of these things. Eventually, they decided they grew tired of just the coastlines of Numenor, which were considerable, and eventually decided to build enough shipbuilding to start visiting back in Middle-earth many centuries later, and just did so kind of as explorers, right? The initial little explorer fleet here and there, not very many. And when they landed, what they found was a wild, primitive land, overrun, with creatures and terrified Manish tribes, just completely reverted back to a more primitive survival, living in huts, stone spears, things like that. Far less primitive than the Druidine and all that. The Druidine maintained their primitiveness, but were not primitive, right? They were part of nature. They didn't ever become industrial.
Sam, we really need to get Sam on this because my brother-in-law, I don't know if you
Yes,
know Sam.
yes.
So he spent, he lived 7 years of his life growing up in Peru, South America, visiting several different Indian tribes out in the jungle that, the Wycliffe Bible translators, people came out, did community development, they learned language, got to know people, recorded their customs. Anyway,
Finish your point, and then Romain will tell you about our neighbor.
he really needs to speak to this. I think we need to maybe part 2 if we can get Sam on next month.
Great.
Because
Love to have him.
he actually prefers not to use the word primitive. He'll talk about, there's technological advances, but what we kind of think of is technology
In our
is helpful.
snobbery.
We are like, well, clearly people who have
Everybody before us is such primitive barbarians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's actually the word barbarian comes from the Greeks who were like, those guys, they have beards and,
Yes.
they're not sophisticated like we are.
Exactly. Yes.
Those Irish
Hey!
and Finns.
Yes. I'm both.
I know.
So the neighbor here who moved in not too long ago, what he does for a living is go out to all of these remaining cultures of undocumented languages or barely documented languages, to try to translate the Bible into their tongue.
Wow.
He spends time with these tribes and such, and then tries to learn the language and then translate the Bible and stuff.
It takes a lot of work.
That's what that family
That's so
does.
cool.
Yeah, and they're Tolkien fans. I keep trying to encourage them
Nice.
to come join us.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, I just thought you'd appreciate that little
Very
tidbit
cool.
there. I mean, he's probably the closest thing we know to a philologist
Yeah.
because they study all the roots of languages
Oh,
and
yeah.
evolution and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, they discovered this primitive, scary land, horrible creatures, distorted, warped creatures. Not a fun place, dangerous place, and they came very advanced compared to what they found, and they like, okay, well, we'll come back next time, bring you some gifts and such. So they started, and then it'd be like decades before they'd come back again.
Which is
in
kind of
that
an echo of what
region.
the elves had done for them. So now they're
Exactly.
kind of passing it on.
Yes, and so they come back, and this time they're like, hey, we've got this great gift for you, let us show you how to make steel, whatever, and slowly they were the gift bringers. And they were very tall compared to the people here, towering 7 feet tall and such. Yeah. And, I mean, imagine an entire
We bring
ship
in this orange ball to you.
of people that I'm like short. Right?
Yes.
I'm 6'7", and I'd be the runt. Right? Imagine a whole
That'd be
ship
a
full of
refreshing
that.
change.
Well, I practiced with the Jazz, and Mark Eaton was 7'4".
Oh man.
So and
Somebody
Carl
you can
Malone was
look up to.
6'9". We were the same height, but his shoulders were
Yeah.
like that. Anyway,
Wow.
so this went back and forth for centuries, slowly showing up as gift bringers, bringing language and education, very much like the elves did for them in previous generations, and slowly started to drive back the shadow from the shore, from Middle-earth. They slowly pushed back the shadow. The shadow?
Only the shadow knows.
Yes. And so slowly Middle-earth became a better place to be thanks to the Numenorians.
Yeah.
And they were good. They were doing it. They weren't there. There wasn't a quid pro quo. They just thought it was the right thing to do. Over time, as they became more avid explorers, they needed more ships. They'd slowly been stripping all the forests of Numenor to build their ships, because they built a lot of ships. And this mirrors a lot of like England and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
like colonial England.
All the oaks are gone.
Yep. They slowly started to go up all the great rivers like Anduin and the Grey Flood
the
and
Mythithal.
yeah, and slowly start stripping all the trees there to make more ships
Which is why they're all plains now.
in those areas. Yeah,
Yeah.
Greenwood the Great used to be contiguous instead of pockets. That whole area was all covered in trees.
And that's what Fingorn, right?
Yep.
Treebeard says that
It used
a
to be all
squirrel
part
could
of it,
cross.
one end to the other.
Yep.
Yep. So, and then they started to come as settlers rather than just visitors and gift bringers. And so they started to create ports, and you had Umbar and Pelargir and places like that. And of course, their exchange with elves was getting better, and that was all good. So it's still good, but getting a little bit more resource.
Then they went all settlers of Catan.
Wait a minute, I have a question. I
Yeah.
forget. But was there still some elves left in Middle Earth at the time?
Oh yeah, the elves, but the elves had become reclusive and were in pockets. So you had them in the Grey Havens and
Yes.
yes, and they just kind of they huddled in their little pocket. And by now, this is after because the flooding of
Beleriand.
Beleriand was gone, so the elves are licking their wounds. So they went into a huddled survival mode,
This is when some
pulled
elves,
back from everybody.
Yeah, and this is also the same time period, I believe.
Some
when
elves
you-
went back to.
Yes, because you have some of those Sindarin elves crossing the Misty Mountains east, and this is like where, for example, you have like Legolas, his father, Thranduil's father, Warfer, who was basically a Sindarin elf. You have these Sun elves come over and meld with the Sylvan elves of Mirkwood, but it's kind of where he had participated in that the war of the Valar, the last big one.
Right. Yeah. The last one, with the last battle of Melkor,
Wasn't there a huge amount
destroyed
that went
the
to
earth.
Amon?
What's
Wasn't
that?
there a huge amount after the war that went back to Amon?
There was a small
There
group
was
that did go back.
small contingent. Yeah. There were many
Because I
died in the
I
wars.
thought that oh, what's his name? Now I can't even say it.
Círdan?
No, the half elf.
Oh, you're talking about Arendelle.
Eärendil, asking for help.
No, not Arendelle. The other one.
How about Elrond? And
Elrond, yeah. Elrond's a half elf. So
Yes.
he,
Yeah.
even though he chose to go with the elves,
Right.
he is human. And then wasn't it his brother that
Elros. Or,
chose
Elros went to
Yeah.
Numenor.
chose to be human?
Yes.
And that's where Aragorn is descendant from.
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Elendil and all that.
So in some ways, you could almost say, like, I can understand why Elrond's still hanging around, but I thought that a good portion of the elves decided to go to Aman.
Later
And
over time-
the only people left from that group was Galadriel and her folks that had that little
I think at the
spot
end,
in the
yeah,
tree flooring.
I'm not sure. I'd have to check, Corey, but I'm wondering if that might be at the end of the Second Age when another, because remember there was the last alliance of elves and men, which comes
Yeah, there were still a lot of elves.
which
before-
comes at the. I remember that epic battle where Sauron's
Yeah.
his armor
gets
and
cut
the
off,
finger
yeah.
is cut off. So I think it's after that
They start to leave.
But me,
Tolkien's reasoning for why the elves were leaving Middle Earth. I don't know. It seemed like
They were fading away. Men were on the rise and they were fading. There were very few elves being born anymore. They were.
It's the relationship
they
with
missed
time.
home. Yeah, being around for so long. But there were still up until the Third Age. There were a lot of elves around. Still.
otherwise you couldn't have had the Great Alliance.
Exactly.
You know where they're
Exactly.
actually Gil-galad.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean he's
Exactly.
kicking butt.
But a whole bunch were lost in the war, and the battle with Morgoth destroyed the lands. There was not anywhere in the world that was not damaged by that last battle, and that's why the Valar pulled back, and because they never want that to happen again.
And they turned the curved road to the, or that we. No, that's
No,
after.
that's after.
That's
Numenor.
after the fall of
That's
Numenor.
Numenor. Yeah. So, but they swore they would never fight directly ever again.
Pulling back, retreat.
Yeah. So not only did Valar pull back, the elves pulled back from all the Manish races they were helping, and the Númenóreans had pulled away. So you had no light, if you will, left in the land until the Númenóreans started to come out, and the elves were staying in their little enclaves.
Which makes the Druidine
Huddling.
even more amazing.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
they're the ones who didn't come to Numenor.
Right, they did. They still did not corrupt. They still did their own thing. They were being hunted now because again the anger of Morgoth, all of that, and their minions seeking revenge. So they had to kind of. So it is a time of hiding for eons, and the Númenóreans start to bring light back to the land. They started to bring destruction later, but at first they bring light to it. So we go through that. That goes on for a long time, and then the Númenóreans start to become more and more full of themselves and haughty. As their lifespans become shorter, they become more afraid of death. And this is before the poisoning of Sauron. And and that often triggers a fear response where people start to become more invested in materialistic goods and things to try to feel more of a permanence to their impermanence, etc. And you see them hoarding wealth and starting now to come at demanding tribute for their protection.
Yeah.
And such. Like, we did all this protection for you, give us tribute.
Kind of like Hong Kong becoming a British.
Careful.
Oops, sorry. Kind of like perhaps vague parallels in our world.
That's because that's one of the we have to be really obscure now, unfortunately,
Yes.
with the insanity of what's going on. So, I know.
Or maybe American.
Eventually, we're going to be streaming
Were
on
we
our.
talking about ping pong?
Eventually, we're going to be streaming on our own website, and we can say what we want to say. But for now,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm
Could
just
I
letting you-
ask if we could? It's a short letter. Could we
Yeah, go
move
ahead.
on to that?
Yeah.
So we'll come back to Numenor
Another time.
next month and
Sure.
see if we can.
we're leading up to, because that is the theme for Tolkien Moon in September, and for the next 3 Tolkien Moons, it's the rise and fall of Numenor.
So a Q&A on Numenor again next month, and anything goes. Okay. Would you one of you be willing to read?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay, maybe we can take turns. 175.
Because I did a thorough research on everything Numenorian that I could find
I'm really looking forward to it.
for these modules that I wrote.
Okay. Carry on, Anthony.
This is from a letter to Mrs. Molly Waldron, 30th November 1955. The Lord of the Rings was broadcast in the BBC third program during 1955 and 1956. Among the large cast, the parts of Gandalf and Tom Bombadil were played by the actor Norman Shelley.
Huh.
Tolkien says, "I think the book quite unsuitable for a dramatization, and have not enjoyed the broadcasts, though they have improved. I thought Tom Bombadil dreadful, but worse still was the announcer's preliminary remarks that Goldberry was his daughter, and that Willoman was an ally of Mordor. Cannot people imagine things hostile to men and hobbits who brand them without being in league with the devil?"
Wow. So that goes back to our earlier comments, right? Anything? So I didn't realize that they had actually had a BBC radio program before the one from the late 70s. So that was like the second go.
Yeah, I've heard clips from it.
Huh. That would be kind of painful to listen to now, I suppose.
I enjoy them, even though all of them go off and do their own literary license.
Kind of like the soft spot in our hearts for the Rankin Bass, right?
Right, exactly. Okay, it's out there, but they gave it a shot.
Corey, you want to read the next one?
Next letter?
Yeah, I think it's probably not very long.
From a letter to Naomi Mitchison, is that right?
Yep, it was one of his big time.
8th December 1955. I had to deliver the opening lecture of the newly founded O'Donnell Lectures in Celtic Studies, already overdue, and I composed it all with all the woe in the world, as the wine. I don't know how to pronounce that name.
Gowan.
Gowan?
Or Gawain. Some people say Gawain.
Gowan is the correct, according to Katie's Irish.
Well, it says.
But everybody mispronounces it.
The wretched fox with the hounds.
You won't get okay.
It says that the wretched fox with the hounds on his tail.
I'd love to, because she's
All the
always
more-
talking on that.
All the more woe, since I am the merest amateur in such matters, and Celtic scholars are critical and litigious, and more woe since I was smitten with laryngitis. Ooh. I think poorly of the broadcast adaptations, especially except for a few details. I think they are not well done. Even granted the script and the legitimacy of the enterprise, which I do not grant, but they took some time with the names. I thought that the dwarf, Glowin, not Gimli, but I suppose Gimli will look like his father. Apparently someone's idea of a German was not too bad, if a bit exaggerated. I do think of the dwarves like Jews, at once native and alien in their habitations, speaking the languages of the country, but with an accent due to their own private tongue. I have now got a pestilent doctorate thesis to explore, when I would rather be doing something less useful. I'm sorry about my
Pestilent doctoral thesis.
I'm sorry about my childish amusement with arithmetic, but there it is. The new Gregorian calendar was just a bit better than the Gregorian, the later being on average 26 seconds fast. PA? And the new Lenorian 17.2 seconds slow. I'm not quite sure I understand.
He was enjoying calculating his own calendars.
Because we
Playing with the numbers.
Gregorian
He
replaced the
had leap
Julian.
year and everything.
Yes, exactly.
It's
26
slightly off.
seconds fast per annum
there
per
we
year.
go. There we go.
And the Numenorian 17.2 seconds. That is kind of a geeky thing to. I wouldn't have suspected it. Arithmetic?
He was an uber geek.
You're right.
He was an uber geek. He puts all of us to shame as far as geekdom.
Pretty much.
He has a PhD in geekdom and pedantry.
Exactly. All right, Hawk, carry on.
All right. 177, letter 177. From a letter to Rainer Unwin, 8th of December, 1955. The radio adaptation of The Lord of the Rings was discussed on the BBC program The Critics. And on the 16th November, W.H. Auden gave a radio talk about the book in which he said, quote, "If someone dislikes it, I shall never trust their literary judgment about anything again." End quote. Meanwhile, Edwin Muir, reviewing The Return of the King in The Observer on 27th November, wrote, "All the characters are boys masquerading as adult heroes and will never come to puberty. Hardly one of them knows anything about women." End quote.
Ooh.
Dang.
So he wants a real little person. Is that what they're saying?
So here's Tolkien. I agreed with the critics' view of the radio adaptation, but I was annoyed that after confessing that none of them had read the book, they should turn their attention to it and me, including surmises on my religion. I also thought Auden rather bad. He cannot at any rate read verse, having a poor rhythmical sense, and
ouch.
deplored his making the book, quote, a test of literary taste, end
Interesting.
quote. You cannot do that with any work, and if you could, you only infuriate. I was fully prepared for Robert Robinson's rejoinder, quote, fairgrounder Barker, end quote.
Oh, like at a fairground, somebody's just
Go get it, see the grand bearded old lady, come on down.
Yeah.
Da-da-da-da, but I suppose all this is good for sales. My correspondence is now increased by letters of fury against the critics and the broadcast. One elderly lady, in part the model for Lobelia, indeed, Lobelia, the Saxville Bagginses, though she does not suspect it, would I think certainly have said about Auden and others had they been in range of her umbrella. Set about.
yes,
Set about them, yeah.
whacking them with
Yep.
her umbrella.
I hope in this vacation to begin surveying the Silmarillion, though evil fate has plumped a doctorate thesis on me.
He's got to evaluate somebody else's doctoral thesis.
Oh, and
Wouldn't that be terrible if you're the guy?
not
you're like,
quite finished. Apparently, there's a little bit more. But yeah, no. Am I miss?
Blast
Yeah,
Edmund
no.
Merritt.
I
Blood.
honestly think
He's
Auden.
almost dead. Just say one
Good.
short piece.
Blast Edwin Muir in his delayed adolescence. He is old enough to know better. It might do him good to hear what women think of his, quote, knowing about women, end quote, especially as a test of being mentally adult. If he had an M.A., I should nominate him for the professorship of poetry, a sweet revenge. And then there's a footnote to that.
Okay.
Footnote.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have it. Do you have it? I'll look it up. I can pull it up. Okay. Anyway, go ahead and discuss. I'll pull up the footnote.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, W.H. Auden, I knew he would. I mean, he knew Tolkien.
Yeah,
knew
friends.
who he
They were
was,
friends.
and I just. The problem is, I keep looking for their quote, and I keep thinking it was Auden who wrote the quote, but I keep looking it up on the internet. And I can't
Which
figure
one?
it out. It's something about witches and goblins, and he pretty much says like witches and goblins really do exist. They just don't look like what you think they do, or something, more or less. It's kind of that idea that the misquoted Chesterton is that children should be taught stories about monsters because in real life there are monsters. That's a bad rendition of it, but
The note from the letter is, this professorship at Oxford had fallen vacant with the end of C. Day Lewis's term of office, and nominations were being invited for his successor. W.H. Auden was eventually elected.
I still think it's funny that he sure did have a lot to say about Auden for being friends.
Yeah.
What kind of friend is Tolkien? If you have to get,
Well, I
they
think.
must get together for a beer and must
Oh yeah.
must see that.
Scholarly debate.
The eagle child.
Academic.
The bird and the baby.
Yeah, pretty
Just-
much. I mean, he certainly didn't shy away from disagreeing strongly with friends, and which is kind of a nice alternative to nowadays. So anyway,
Not difficult to elicit an opinion from him.
no, this is true. But iron sharpens iron, as the proverb says. But
Yep.
I think that's probably a good place to leave it.
Yep. We'll wrap it up from there. And so again, we'll be back September 15th, 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific time, right here on youtube.com/Tolkien Scholars. You can catch the videos later on the same channel if you missed them while they're live. The website's tolkienscholars.org. We're on Twitter at
And we're
Tolkien
going to put
Scholars.
a link to this picture that we don't have.
Yeah, in the notes.
So we'll see you next month, third Saturday of each month, right here for our Tolkien Society. And then remember, September 18th, I'm going to be scrambling to get the website ready for RSVP and everything. You can sign up and join.
September 19th, I think.
September 19th
Yep.
is Tolkien Moot.
Yep.
16 or 17 now. Because we were 15 or 16 last year. Anyway, we're up in the teens, the upper teens. And it will be the rise of Numenor, the gift bringers of Numenor and such.
Indeed.
So you're gonna have something that like opens up and like the you're gonna see.
Not the litter. It's more like the rise and fall of
You've got
original
the
terror.
two tables. So the top table could be the continent and then the ocean.
Yeah.
I just want to see like a giant
Little
continent
Karma
come
rising
out.
up.
You know?
Dun, dun!
No, it is that scene.
Thus spake Zarathustra.
It's going to be, or it could be
rising
that scene.
over the horizon
It
as you
could
get
be
closer.
It could be the scene from Close Encounters of the Third Kind where he's like he builds the mountain and he says this means something.
Devil's Tower. He keeps building it over and over and over again,
Right.
compulsively. Yeah.
With his mashed potatoes
Yes.
or whatever. It
And
was.
eventually his whole garden into his kitchen. All right.
That was the mashed potatoes was Weird Al.
What?
Weird Al did a mock-up on that. It was, I think, with bricks that wasn't it, or did he use it with mashed potatoes too?
He
in the
started
movie,
when he
have
was
you
losing.
seen
He
the movie?
started
He
with
did
the mashed potatoes
In the
first.
movie,
That's where it started with.
Oh,
And then he kept escalating. So pretty soon he was throwing the
I
whole
thought
garden,
that was Weird Al's
throwing the
take on
garden
it.
through the window and building it in
brick.
the house.
Have you
Right.
ever seen it?
I have.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, he starts with the
fuzzy
mashed
memories.
potatoes.
Sorry,
He's
Corey,
got
it's been 20
No,
years.
what's funny about it is he starts with like a spoon.
Yeah.
And it's not enough for him, so he's like using his fingers
It
and
was compulsive. Yeah.
Poor, his family's like, what's going
Yeah,
on
he was
with
losing
Daddy?
it.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll be back next month. So thank you for joining us.
thank you.
Sorry for the technical challenges. Again, it was first time in months. We'll keep improving each time. Wherever it may be well. Happy gaming. Well, okay, for those who are gaming. Sorry, I do not say
Happy
it.
Tolkien.
Wherever it may be well and Namadia.